Hello friends, this is Standardization World channel. My name is Bolata Bayule and I'm going to show you all the secrets of the technical regulation, standardization and conformity assessment system. Couple past lessons we discussed the ways of the removal of the technical barriers to trade. So there are actually two main ways. The first one, it is through the mandatory safety requirements, and the second one is through the voluntary quality requirements. So the mandatory safety requirements are in the technical regulations or mandatory standards, and the voluntary quality requirements are in the voluntary standards. We have already discussed the mandatory safety requirements and the role of the World Trade Organization in the technical barriers to trade elimination process. And we also briefly talked about the international, regional and national standards which contain the voluntary quality requirements. And today we are going to talk about the biggest organization for standardization in the world, which is the International Organization for Standardization, ISO. No doubt that ISO is the leader in the field of standardization all over the world. Look at this map. As you see, the blue countries are the full members of the ISO. The orange ones are the correspondent members. The brown ones are the subscriber members, and the other gray countries haven't joined ISO yet. As most of the international organizations, ISO is the member-based organization, which means that the countries or representatives from the countries, they join to ISO as members. The full members, correspondent members and the observer members. What can we say about the ISO? There are 167 countries in the ISO. From them, 124 countries are full members of the ISO. There are more than 24,000 ISO standards are published for today. ISO has more than 250 technical committees for standardization and more than 650 subcommittees. The main document of the ISO, according to which ISO develops and making its activities, is the ISO Strategy 2030, the headquarters of the ISO in Geneva, Switzerland. What is the ISO goals and objectives? ISO goal is the development of international standards for products and services. Pretty simple goal, but not as simple as it sounds. The objective is to promote the development of standardization on a global scale to ensure international exchange of goods and mutual assistance, as well as to expand cooperation in the field of intellectual, scientific, technical and economic activities. The scope of the ISO standards, it covers all the areas except the electronics and electrical engineering. All the areas. The ISO structure. The main administrative managing body of the ISO is the General Assembly, which consists of all the full members of the ISO. Usually, General Assembly meets once a year and it is September. Each year on September there are the General Assembly meetings. On that meetings, the ISO underlines all the achievements during the past year and comes to some final decisions, the approval of some strategic or maybe political or maybe financial, maybe some other administrative documents and so on. All the things, all the decisions, all the documents approves by the voting, by the balloting process. But actually, as practice shows us, that when the document or any final decision appears in the agenda of the General Assembly meeting, usually almost all the full members, they agrees with the decision or with the approval of any documents. Usually on the General Assembly there are no any problems in the decision-making process. There is the second administrative managing body, which is the Council. The ISO Council, which consists of only 20 countries. The ISO Council has its meetings 3 times a year, the first one usually in February, the second one in June and the third one in September. And if the General Assembly usually decides oppositely for 100% for all the decisions, all the documents, all the things, all the matters. The ISO Council, when any problem, any issue, any document or any decision appears in the agenda of the ISO Council, they discuss it, they try it, they check it for some time. Sometimes it takes long. Some decisions can be made in 1 or maybe 2 years. Under Council there are also some other bodies. The Policy Development Committees. There are 3 Policy Development Committees. The Policy Development Committees are actually the technical committees, but with some special political roles. So there are the Policy Development Committee for Developing Countries, DEVCO, for the Conformity Assessment Issues, CASCO, for Consumer Policy, CAPOLCO. So also there are some Council Standing Committees, which are the Council Standing Committee for Strategy and Policy, for Finance, for Review of Nominations and the Oversight. Also there is the Technical Management Board, which is responsible for the activities of all the technical committees and subcommittees of the ISO. And of course the standards development process as well. And there are also President's Committee with the, of course, advisory functions. One of the main parts of ISO structure which does all the dirty work is the ISO Central Secretariat. So if we are talking about the membership in ISO at the organization, it has 3 types of the membership. So the first one is the full member. If the national standards body of the country is a full member of the ISO, so it has firstly the rights to vote, and it has no any limits inside the organization. The full member of the ISO is by default the member of the General Assembly. It also can be chosen to the ISO Council for 3-year term, and also can take part in the policy development committees, in the unlimited amount of the technical committees and subcommittees, and the Council Standing Committees, Technical Management Board, and so on. The second one is the correspondent member. The correspondent members, they are not the full members, of course, so they don't have rights to vote. They are not in the General Assembly. They cannot be chosen to the ISO Council, but they have some limited amount of the technical committees and subcommittees where they can take part as the full members. And the third one is the observers. So it is obvious that the observers do not have any rights to vote. They just observe. If you are talking about the participation in the work of the technical committees and subcommittees of the ISO, so there are only 2 options: is the full member and as an observer. Observers do not have the rights to vote, they just observe, they can discuss, they can attend the meetings of the technical committee, but they don't have rights to vote. The full member has rights to vote. All the standards in the ISO, and it is actually the best international practices, all the standards usually on the basis of the technical committees, they approves and publishes by the voting process. So all the TC members or SC members, they just vote for the approval or disapproval of the standard. Membership and work in ISO technical committees and subcommittees helps to reduce the time for development and approval publication of state national standards harmonized with the international standard. I guess it is obvious too that, for example, the experts from the country which are the full member of some specific technical committee of the ISO, they, for example, took part in the development of some ISO standard, let's say for the water. So if they took part on the development of that standard, they will be familiar with the final published ISO standard for the water. And when the country will start the national harmonization process of the ISO standard as a national one, so it is obvious that it will be maybe a little bit, but anyway it will be faster than it could be otherwise. Second, reduce technical barriers to trade and expand international trade, of course. And the third one is to get the opportunities to defend the interests of the country in international and foreign markets. Of course, for example, if you attend in the ISO meetings and you take part in the ISO standard development process, so you can try to put in the draft ISO standard the requirements and the indicators which are beneficial mostly for you. And if you can find the good reasons for all other TC members so that they will support you in your proposals, in your indicators and in your requirements, so you will win, and the ISO standard will be very good for you, very beneficial for you and for all your country. How to become a member of an ISO technical committee or subcommittee? It is pretty much easy. There are 3 steps. The first one is to submit an application to the national standardization body with a justification for joining the ISO TCSC, also indicating the status, the full members or observer members, and the responsible employee from the applicant, her position and contact information. After receiving the application, the National Standardization Body sends the official letter to the Secretariat of the relevant ISO TCSC about the interest of the applicant to participate in the work of the ISO TCSC as a full member or observer as it is in the application. And the step 3, after consideration of the request by the ISO TCSC Secretariat, the ISO Central Secretariat includes the country of the applicant to the ISO TCSC on the official ISO website, which is iso.org. And after these 3 small steps, you can become the full member of any specific ISO TC or SC that you are interested in. So this was the brief information about the activities of the International Organization for Standardization, which is ISO. If the video was interesting and useful for you, follow my channel and wait for new videos regarding the technical regulations, standardization and conformity assessment issues. Also, I would like you to leave some comments where you can write down what was really interesting, what was really useful to you and what was not, and also what would you like to know more about these topics. Just write it down and I'll try to prepare this special video for you. This is Standardization World channel. Thank you for your attention and have a good day.